If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop. The smell that finally broke me wasn't the metallic tang of blood or the sterile sharpness of antiseptic that clung to my scrubs after a 12-hour shift. It wasn't the smell of sickness or fear that I washed from my hair every single night. The smell that broke me was the rich, savory aroma of braised short ribs, his favorite, filling a kitchen that had long ago stopped feeling like my own. It was a smell that was supposed to mean comfort, celebration, apology. But as I stood over the stove, stirring the dark, glossy sauce, the only thing I felt was the quiet, clean click of a lock disengaging in my own heart. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and garlic, but underneath it all, I could smell the cold, empty space of the future, and for the first time in years, it smelled like peace. My name is Talia. I am 33 years old, and for the last 8 of those years, I was Andre's wife. In my professional life, I'm a registered nurse in a busy Memphis emergency department. My entire career is built on a foundation of triage. You learn to assess a situation in seconds. What is bleeding, what is broken, what is beating, and what has stopped. You learn to differentiate between a dramatic cry for attention and the quiet, stoic patient in the corner whose silence is the most terrifying symptom of all. You develop a kind of professional detachment, a necessary buffer that allows you to run toward the chaos without being consumed by it. For years, I thought this skill made me a better partner. I believed my capacity to absorb, to manage, to stabilize was a form of love. I see now it was only a form of endurance. Love is a reciprocal system of care. Endurance is a one-way street that ends in exhaustion. I had been confusing the two for a very long time. We had been together for 11 years, married for 8. Long enough that his habits had become my routines, his needs my priorities, his comfort my responsibility. It didn't happen all at once. It was an erosion, a slow and steady wearing away of my own boundaries, so subtle I didn't notice the coastline of myself had changed until the tide went out and left me standing on a sliver of sand I barely recognized. The foundation of our life together, I had come to believe, was my ability to anticipate and provide. It was a system I had built, board by board, nail by nail, a system designed to run on the quiet fuel of my own depletion. The inciting wound, the single sentence that finally made the whole structure tremble, wasn't delivered in anger. It wasn't shouted during a fight or hissed in a moment of cruelty. It was spoken calmly, almost with a sigh of relief, as he sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. We had been fighting for 2 days about something so trivial I can no longer recall the subject. A forgotten bill, a missed appointment, one of the dozen little administrative tasks of our life that had become my sole domain. The fight itself was the usual pattern. I would raise a concern, he would become defensive, I would state the facts of the situation, he would accuse me of nagging, and then he would retreat into a wall of resentful silence. For 2 days, the silence in our house was a living thing. It sat between us at the dinner table, it lay in the bed like a third person. I hated it. The tension felt like a low-grade fever, leaving me weary and drained. So, I did what I always did. I broke first. I went to the grocery store after a long shift, my feet aching and my mind numb with fatigue. I bought the ingredients for his favorite meal. I didn't see it as surrender. I saw it as a reset, an act of care designed to lower the temperature, to bring us back to a place where we could talk. A peace offering. I spent 2 hours cooking. I browned the meat, sautéed the vegetables, Let it all simmer until the whole house was wrapped in that warm, comforting scent. I set the table. I called his name, my voice softer than it had been in days. He came into the dining room, looked at the plate of food I had prepared for him, and then he looked at me. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. He sat down, picked up his fork, and just before he took the first bite, he looked up at me again, his eyes clear and untroubled. "Good," he said, the word landing with the soft, final weight of a period. "I was waiting for you to come to your senses." He said it so casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. He wasn't trying to be cruel. That's what made it so much worse. In his mind, this was the natural order of things. I had been difficult, unreasonable, and now, by performing this act of service, I was admitting my error. I was apologizing. The meal wasn't a bridge, it was a white flag. My care was my concession. He had not bent, had not compromised, had not reflected. He had simply waited. He had waited for me to get tired of the tension, tired of the silence, and resume my duties. He looked down at his plate and took a bite, oblivious to the fact that with 7 simple words, he had just diagnosed a terminal condition. I stood there, watching the man I married chew his food, and I felt the last flicker of warmth in my chest cool to ash. He wasn't my partner. I was his nurse, and he was the quiet, stoic patient in the corner, the one whose prognosis was far worse than he could ever imagine. That night, something shifted in me permanently. It was the kind of internal change that happens without a sound. It wasn't a storm. It was a quiet recalibration. The way a compass needle trembles and then settles, pointing true north. For years, Andre's comfort had been my true north. Now, standing in the silence of my own kitchen, listening to the clink of his fork against the plate, a new direction was asserting itself. My own survival. I started to look back, not with the soft focus lens of nostalgia, but with the sharp diagnostic eye I used at work. I began an archaeology of our disrespect, digging through the layers of our shared history to find the origin of the illness. I realized our dynamic was built on a foundation of my invisible labor, a constant, humming effort that he had long ago started to mistake for the natural state of things, like gravity or the rising of the sun. It started with my job. As a nurse, my schedule was chaos. 12-hour shifts that stretched to 14, nights that bled into mornings, holidays spent under the fluorescent lights of the ER. When we first got married, Andre was my biggest champion. He'd have coffee waiting for me when I got home at 7 a.m., the blinds drawn so I could sleep. He'd rub my feet and listen to me vent about the traumas of the day, his face a mask of sympathy. He saw my work as heroic. But slowly, over the years, my heroism became his inconvenience, and then his expectation. I remembered a Tuesday about 3 years ago. I'd been asked to cover a night shift for a colleague whose child was sick. It meant working 16 hours straight, but she was a single mom and I knew she needed the grace. I texted Andre to let him know. His reply was instant. "Again? But you were going to make that lasagna tonight." There was no "be safe," no "that's kind of you," just the immediate accounting of how my sacrifice would affect his dinner plans. I remember sitting in the break room, the phone feeling heavy in my hand, and a profound weariness settling deep in my bones. I typed back, "I'll pick something up on the way home tomorrow," and spent the rest of my shift feeling a low, simmering guilt. I was a professional saving lives, and I was feeling guilty about a canceled lasagna. When I finally got home the next morning, the sun was just starting to burn off the Memphis morning haze. The house was quiet. I walked in, my body one giant ache, to find the sink piled with dishes from the night before, a pizza box open on the coffee table, and his work clothes from the previous day in a heap on the bedroom floor. He was sleeping peacefully, a slight smile on his face. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not resentment. Just a hollow, echoing emptiness. The man who used to have coffee waiting for me now couldn't be bothered to rinse his own plate. I didn't wake him. I quietly gathered the dishes, cleaned the living room, and started a load of his laundry before I finally allowed myself to crawl into bed. As I drifted off to sleep, I remember thinking that my home required more recovery time than my job. This pattern became the rhythm of our lives. I worked nights so he could have the car during the day for his job in logistics. I scheduled my sleep around his schedule, trying to be quiet in the mornings when he was getting ready, trying to be awake and pleasant in the evenings when he came home, even if I was just hours away from another grueling shift. My life was a constant exercise in self-contortion, bending myself into a shape that would cause him the least amount of disruption. Then there was the food. I cooked. Every day. It wasn't something we explicitly discussed. It was a role I slipped into and then became trapped in. I enjoyed cooking at first. It was creative, a way to care for him, for us. I'd plan meals, shop for groceries, fill our home with the warm smells of a shared life. But my enjoyment became his expectation. My cooking wasn't a gift, it was a utility. There was the time his parents came to visit. I worked a full day, rushed home, and spent 4 hours making a perfect Southern Sunday dinner in the middle of a Thursday. Fried chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese, sweet potato casserole. I was sweating and exhausted by the time they arrived, but the table was beautiful, the food was hot, and Andre was beaming. He took all the credit, not with his words, but with his casual ownership of the event. "We're so glad you could come," he'd say, as if he'd had any part in the creation of the meal beyond agreeing to host. His mother praised the chicken, and he just smiled and said, "Talia's getting pretty good at it, isn't she?" Not, "Didn't she do an amazing job?" But she's getting good at it, as if she were my instructor and he was grading my progress. I remember smiling, my face feeling like a porcelain mask, while inside I felt a hot surge of fury. I had orchestrated the entire evening, from the clean hand towels in the bathroom to the ice in their tea, and he had relegated me to the role of a promising student in my own home. After they left, as I stood at the sink washing a mountain of dishes, he came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "That was great, babe," he said, kissing my neck. They were really impressed. He saw my labor only through the lens of how it reflected on him. My exhaustion was the price of his good reputation. It was a contaminated memory. What I had once interpreted as a moment of shared triumph now felt like a performance review. I was an employee, and the evening had been a success. The most insidious erosion, however, was in the management of his life. Andre was not an incapable man, but he had outsourced the entire administrative burden of his existence to me. It began with small things. "Babe, can you make me a dentist appointment? You're better on the phone." Or, "Can you remind me to get my oil changed?" I, with my nurse's brain for detail and scheduling, was efficient. I did it without complaint. But the small requests grew until I was managing his entire life. I refilled his prescriptions, arguing with insurance companies on my lunch breaks. I made his doctor's appointments and then had to remind him of them 3 times. I paid his bills from our joint account, tracking due dates and balances while he remained blissfully unaware. I was the keeper of the passwords, the scheduler of the maintenance, the manager of the entire infrastructure of his adulthood. He had no idea how much effort it took to keep his world running smoothly, because the system was designed for him never to have to see it. The work was invisible, and so I was becoming invisible too. I recall one specific afternoon. I was on the phone with his specialist's office, trying to get a prior authorization for a new medication he needed. It was a bureaucratic nightmare of transfers and hold music. I had been on the phone for 45 minutes, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot after my shift had ended, the sun beating down on the windshield. I could hear Andre in the background of my own home, laughing. He was playing video games online with his friends. The sound of his carefree enjoyment, while I was fighting a battle on his behalf that he wasn't even aware of, was so jarring it made my vision swim. "Sir, I understand that," I said into the phone, my voice tight with forced politeness. But his policy clearly states. From inside the house, I heard Andre yell, "Yeah, man, left flank, get him!" I closed my eyes. In that moment, I was two people. I was the competent, capable woman navigating a complex medical system, and I was the fool doing it for a man who had completely abdicated responsibility for his own health, his own life. When I finally got off the phone, the authorization secured, I walked inside, my head pounding. Andre paused his game, muted his headset. "Hey, you're home. What's for dinner?" He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't ask who was on the phone. He didn't notice the tension in my shoulders or the exhaustion etched on my face. His world was simple. He had a need, and I was the person who met it. There was no curiosity about the cost. I looked at him, his face illuminated by the flickering screen, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a patient, a case, and I realized with a sickening lurch that I had been treating him as such for years. I was providing care, not participating in a partnership. I was managing his symptoms, his disorganization, his forgetfulness, his lack of initiative, but I had failed to diagnose the underlying disease, a profound and deeply ingrained entitlement that I had not only tolerated, but enabled. That night, I just said, "I'm too tired to cook, Andre. There's leftovers." He frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he smoothed it away. "Oh, okay. Well, I guess that'll work." He unmuted his headset. "I'm back, guys," he said, and the sound of digital explosions filled the room once more. I walked away, the silence returning to my side of the house, and I understood that I had built my own cage, and the bars were made of my own competence. The breaking point, when it came, wasn't a discovery. There was no other woman, no secret debt. It was something far more intimate and devastating. It was the realization that Andre had a fundamentally different understanding of my actions than I did. After his comment about me coming to my senses, I went quiet. I didn't argue or cry. I simply finished serving the dinner, sat down, and ate my own meal in a state of strange, suspended calm. He chattered on about his day, about a funny video he saw, about his fantasy football league. He didn't notice my silence, or if he did, he interpreted it as peaceful, the conflict having been resolved to his satisfaction. As I washed the dishes later that night, my hands moving automatically in the warm, soapy water, my mind was racing. I was replaying every argument we'd ever had, every period of tense silence, and what came after. The pattern was so clear, so painfully obvious, I felt a wave of nausea. After every disagreement, big or small, I was always the one to initiate the repair. I would bake his favorite cookies. I would suggest a movie night. I would tidy the house until it gleamed. I would cook a special meal. I saw these as acts of love, gestures of reconciliation meant to bring us back together. I was extending a hand. He saw them as my apology, every single time. He believed my acts of care were admissions of guilt. He thought my desire for peace was proof that I knew I had been wrong. He wasn't meeting me halfway. He was waiting at the finish line for me to run the entire race by myself. My love had been systematically misinterpreted as surrender. The realization landed not with a crash, but with a profound and terrifying stillness. It was the quiet of a flatline. The system that had governed our entire relationship was based on a lie. The lie that I was the one who was always at fault, and my service was my penance. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman looking back at me looked tired, but her eyes were clear. The fog of 1,000 small compromises had finally lifted. I was not angry. I was not heartbroken. I was awake. It was a feeling of absolute, chilling clarity. I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my bones, that I could not spend one more day of my life in a home where my care was seen as a currency for forgiveness I didn't owe. I had to leave, not out of anger, but out of a sudden, fierce, and unfamiliar instinct for self-preservation. My training as a nurse kicked in. The situation was critical. The patient was me. And the only life-saving intervention was a radical amputation. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. On the outside, nothing changed. I continued my shifts at the hospital. I cooked dinner. I washed the clothes. I was a ghost in my own life, performing the functions of Talia, the wife, while the real me was somewhere else entirely, planning her escape with the cool, methodical precision of a discharge plan. My nursing skills, once the source of my entrapment, now became the tools of my liberation. I started with a financial triage. On my breaks, I sat in my car and logged into our bank accounts. I meticulously calculated what was mine, what was his, and what was shared. I opened a new bank account in my name only and set up a transfer for my next paycheck. I documented everything, creating a clear, unassailable record. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't mine. I was simply disentangling my own vital signs from the system we shared. Next came logistics. I spent hours online searching for apartments. I found a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of Midtown, not far from the hospital. It was modest, but the pictures showed big windows and clean, empty rooms that seemed to promise silence and light. I filled out the application during a lull in the ER, using the hospital's Wi-Fi. The irony was not lost on me. I was using the infrastructure of my caregiving profession to finally care for myself. I was approved the next day. I signed the lease electronically and paid the deposit from my new account. I had a home. It was real. The most difficult part was the physical separation of our lives, which I had to do right under his nose. I started packing in small, secret increments. I told him I was doing a deep declutter, a project he fully supported with his usual benign neglect. "Great idea, babe," he'd say, not looking up from the television. "This place could use it." So, box by box, I dismantled our life. I started with the things he would never notice, the books I loved that he had never read, the spare linens in the back of the closet, the kitchen gadgets he didn't know how to use. I packed my winter clothes, my nursing school textbooks, the framed photos of my family. I labeled each box with a discrete code and stacked them in the back of my closet, a growing wall of my impending freedom. Each packed item was a small act of reclamation. This is mine. This is mine. This is mine. During this time, Andre was happier than he'd been in months. With the conflict resolved in his mind, he was relaxed and affectionate. He'd wrap his arms around me while I was at the stove, completely unaware that the woman he was holding was already gone. One evening, he came home with a bouquet of grocery store carnations. "Just because," he said, smiling that easy smile of his. A year ago, I would have melted. But now, I saw the gesture for what it was, a low-effort maintenance check. He was topping off the tank, ensuring the system continued to run smoothly. I took the flowers, my hands steady, and arranged them in a vase. "They're lovely, Andre." "Thank you," I said, my voice even. He beamed, satisfied. "I love our quiet nights," he said, settling onto the couch. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this stranger, and I felt a profound sense of detachment. He was comfortable because I was performing comfort. He felt secure because I was maintaining the illusion of security. He had no idea he was living in a house that was already condemned, and that I was the one who had quietly signed the demolition order. The dramatic irony was so thick, so suffocating, I had to turn away and focus on washing a pot, just to have something real to hold on to. His oblivious contentment was the final confirmation. He didn't love me, he loved the services I provided. And the tragedy was, he didn't even know the difference. The day I chose to leave was a Thursday. It was unassuming, ordinary. I worked a day shift, came home, and began the final preparations. The last act. I went to the grocery store one last time. I walked the aisles with a strange, light feeling in my chest. I was buying the ingredients for his favorite meal, braised short ribs, the same meal that had triggered the end. It felt fitting, a bookend, a quiet culinary statement. This is how it started, and this is how it will end. I cooked with painstaking care. I didn't rush. I browned the meat perfectly, deglazed the pan with red wine, let the rosemary and thyme release their fragrance into the air. The process was almost meditative. Every chop of a carrot, every stir of the pot, was a deliberate final gesture. I was not cooking a meal for my husband. I was preparing a stage. I was setting a scene that would speak for me long after I was gone. I set the table for one, his spot. I used our best china, the plates we saved for holidays. I folded a cloth napkin and placed the silverware just so. When the ribs were done, tender and falling off the bone, I plated his dinner. A generous portion over a bed of creamy polenta, with a sprinkle of fresh parsley on top. It looked like a magazine photo, a perfect picture of a loving home. Then, I went into our bedroom for the last time. My car was already packed. The boxes I had hidden were transferred to a small storage unit I had rented, a task completed over 2 of my lunch breaks. All that was left was a single duffel bag with my essentials for the next few days. I took one last look around the room we had shared. His clothes were on the floor. His watch was on the nightstand. It felt like a hotel room I was checking out of. I felt no sadness. Just a quiet, steady sense of completion. I walked back into the dining room. His plate was steaming on the table, a perfect, solitary offering. I took my wedding and engagement rings off, my fingers feeling unnervingly light without them. I placed them on the table, next to his plate, the diamonds catching the light. I didn't leave a note. The scene was the note. The meal I had cooked but would not share. The empty chair opposite him. The rings I was returning. The silence. It said everything I had been unable to say for years. It said, "You waited for me to serve you. So here is your meal. But my life is no longer on the menu." I picked up my duffel bag, walked to the front door, and didn't look back. I closed it softly behind me, the click of the latch echoing the sound I had heard in my heart 2 weeks before. I walked down the path to my car, the Memphis air thick and warm on my skin. As I drove away from the home I had built, the life I had curated, I didn't cry. My temperature was quiet, steady, already gone. The woman who lived in that house had been disappearing for years. I was just helping her leave. The first hour of freedom felt like holding my breath. I drove to my new apartment, the key feeling unfamiliar and solid in my hand. The building was quiet, the hallway smelled of fresh paint. I unlocked the door to Unit 3B and stepped inside. It was completely empty. Just bare walls, a clean floor, and 3 large windows looking out over the evening sky. The emptiness didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. It felt possible. It was a blank page. I dropped my duffel bag in the middle of the floor and just stood there, listening. There was no television droning in the background, no sound of a video game, no hum of an appliance I needed to fix. There was only the sound of my own breathing. I had forgotten what it sounded like. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights twinkling to life. I felt a single, perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Andre. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A text came through. "Where are you? Dinner's getting cold." The casual entitlement of it almost made me laugh. He wasn't worried. He was annoyed. His routine had been disrupted. I sat down on the floor, my back against the cool wall, and watched my phone light up. The escalation cascade began, as predictable as a clinical pathway. First came the shock and denial, a series of texts. "Talia? Seriously, where are you? Are you trying to make a point? This isn't funny. Pick up your phone." I watched the messages appear, one after another. His confusion was morphing into frustration. I did not respond. My silence was a language he had never bothered to learn, and I was finally speaking it fluently. A phone call. I let it go to voicemail. Another call. Voicemail. Then came the anger and accusation. The tone of the texts shifted. "What the hell is wrong with you? I come home to this weird scene and you're gone? You are being so incredibly childish. Whatever I did, this is a massive overreaction. Are you with your sister? Is she putting these ideas in your head again? This is manipulative, Talia. You know that, right? Trying to punish me." He was cycling through his usual script, the one he used to reframe my legitimate feelings as emotional instability. Overreacting, childish, manipulative. They were words he had used before, words that had once sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. Now, they just looked like text on a screen. They had no power over me. They were symptoms of his panic, nothing more. I turned the phone to silent and set it on the floor across the room. I laid down, my head on my duffel bag, and closed my eyes. For the first time in as long as I could remember, no one needed anything from me. There were no meals to plan, no schedules to manage, no feelings to soothe. The only thing I had to do was breathe. And so I did. In and out. I fell asleep on the floor of my empty apartment and slept for 10 straight hours, a deep, dreamless, uninterrupted sleep. I woke to the morning sun streaming through the windows and the distant sound of city traffic. My back was stiff, but my spirit felt light. I looked at my phone. 37 missed calls, over 50 text messages. He had cycled through the remaining stages. There was negotiation and false remorse. "Okay, I'm sorry. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Just come home and we can talk about it." The apology was a key to a door, not an admission of understanding. It was a means to an end. There was a brief attempt at recruiting allies. A text from his mother. "Andre is very worried. Please call him. You two need to work this out." I deleted it without responding, and then, in the middle of the night, came the raw vulnerability, the message that was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. It was one sentence, sent at 3:14 a.m. "You left over nothing. You always do this." I read it twice. He didn't mean I always leave. He meant I always do this. I always make a big deal. I always get upset. I always disrupt his peace over things he considered to be nothing. The forgotten appointments, the unpaid bills, the emotional neglect, the constant, grinding expectation of my service, all of it was, in his assessment, nothing. He wasn't just avoiding accountability. He was fundamentally incapable of seeing the labor. He wasn't just taking me for granted. He lived in a world where my efforts literally did not exist. They were background noise. He had built his entire life on an invisible infrastructure and was now shocked that the bridge had collapsed. That was it. That was the last line he said that mattered. It was the entire story of our marriage in 7 words. Rebuilding my life began not with a grand gesture, but with a small revolutionary act of selfishness. I went to work the next day and walked into my charge nurse's office. "Brenda," I said, "I need to change my schedule. I can only work day shifts from now on." She looked up surprised. "For how long?" "Permanently," I said, my voice steady. "My availability has changed." She studied my face for a moment, and a look of quiet understanding passed between us. "Okay, Talia," she said, turning to her computer. "Let's see what we can do." Walking out of her office, I felt a sense of profound relief. For 8 years, my career had been arranged around Andre's needs. I had taken the punishing night shifts, the inconvenient weekends, the holiday rotations, because my income was secondary and my time was flexible. Now, my time was my own. My career was my own. I was choosing shifts that honored my body and my well-being. It was the first of 1,000 small choices I would make for myself in the coming months. The days that followed were filled with the quiet, mundane work of starting over. I bought a mattress, then a coffee pot, then a single chair to put by the window. My apartment slowly filled, not with the clutter of a shared life, but with the curated pieces of my own. I ate what I wanted, when I wanted. I left a book open on the floor. I let the silence be silence. It was a peace so profound it felt sacred. I was discovering the person I was when no one else was looking, when no one else needed anything from me. I found that I quite liked her. Andre tried a few more times to reach me. He showed up at the hospital once, waiting by my car after a shift. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage. "Talia, please," he said, his voice raw. "Just talk to me. We can fix this." I stopped a few feet away from him, my keys in my hand. I looked at him, at his tired eyes, his rumpled shirt. I felt no anger. I felt no hate. I felt a deep, sorrowful pity. He still thought it was a problem to be fixed, a negotiation to be won. He didn't understand that I wasn't broken. I was free. "There is nothing to fix, Andre," I said, and my voice was gentle. It was the voice I used with frightened patience, a tone of calm, factual reassurance. "This is just what is." "But why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I don't understand. I thought we were good. I even bought you flowers." He offered the flowers as evidence, as if they were a legal document proving his love. And in that moment, I knew he would never, ever understand. His definition of love was a series of transactions designed to maintain his comfort. My definition was something else entirely. I decided to give him one small piece of the truth, a final act of diagnosis. "You didn't lose me because of a fight, Andre," I said quietly. "You lost me in all the small moments you thought were nothing." I watched him try to process that, his brow furrowed in confusion. He was searching his memory for a big event, a singular betrayal. He would never find it. The cause of death was 1,000 tiny cuts. "I have to go," I said. It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement of fact. I walked around him to my car, got in, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. It's been 6 months now. My life is quiet, and it is my own. I work my day shifts. I come home to my clean, sunny apartment. I read books. I've started walking by the riverfront in the evenings, watching the barges move slowly down the Mississippi. Sometimes I think about Andre. I don't wish him ill. I hope, in a distant, clinical way, that he learns to see the infrastructure of his own life, that he learns to be his own nurse. But his recovery is not my responsibility anymore. I have been discharged from that case. You learn things in nursing. You learn that healing is not the absence of a scar, but the ability of the skin to hold itself together again, changed but whole. You learn that some conditions are chronic and must be managed, while others require a swift, decisive cut to save the whole. You learn that the most important vital sign is a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. For years, I had been monitoring his. Now, I listen to my own. Love should not be a diagnosis. It should not be a list of symptoms you manage in another person. It is not about triage or intervention or the steady administration of care to someone who will not care for themselves. I see that now. Love is the quiet, mutual confidence that when you are tired, someone else will watch over you. Not because you have apologized or conceded or surrendered, but simply because it is their turn. It is the steady, balanced rhythm of a shared life. A system where the load is distributed, not just endured. My previous life was a monument to my endurance. This new one is a testament to my peace. My heart is steady, beating in a quiet room of my own. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.